For 25 long years, Mr. and Mrs. Caleb yearned for a child. The silence of their home echoed the insults from neighbors, who cruelly whispered that Mrs. Caleb had eaten the children in her womb. Mr. Caleb's mother wasn't any kinder, constantly berating Mrs. Caleb for failing to give her son an heir and denying her a grandchild. The strain wore on both of them. Mr. Caleb sunk into despair, while Mrs. Caleb hid her pain behind a mask of resilience. One afternoon, while visiting a friend, Mrs. Caleb confided in her about their plight. Her friend leaned in and whispered, "I know someone who can help, a spiritual man. He works wonders." That night, Mrs. Caleb told her husband about the spiritual man. At first, Mr. Caleb scoffed. "We should wait for God's time," he said firmly. But as the days passed, doubt crept in. He had waited for 25 years. Maybe God's time would never come. Reluctantly, he agreed. Armed with the location her friend provided, the couple set off on a journey filled with equal parts hope and fear. When they arrived, the spiritual man greeted them with an air of authority. He performed strange rituals, muttering incantations under his breath, and then led them to a riverbank. There, he chanted louder, and the waters began to ripple unnaturally. Suddenly, a hand emerged from the depths, holding an apple. "Mrs. Caleb, eat this," the spiritual man said. "Your womb will open, and you will conceive." The couple was overwhelmed with gratitude and hurried home with renewed hope. A few days later, Mrs. Caleb fell ill. Alarmed, they rushed to the hospital, where the doctor delivered shocking news. She was pregnant. Tears streamed down their faces as they embraced, their joy spilling over. Word spread quickly through their community, and the once taunted barren woman became a living miracle. 9 months later, Mrs. Caleb gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. They named her Tiara, their precious gem, and poured all their love into raising her. For 16 years, their home was filled with laughter and happiness. But on Tiara's 16th birthday, everything began to change. She started talking to herself, spending hours by the river, and exhibiting strange, unexplainable powers. She became defiant, her once sweet demeanor replaced by coldness and hostility. Her parents watched helplessly as their beloved daughter transformed into someone they no longer recognized. Desperate for answers, Mr. and Mrs. Caleb returned to the spiritual man. They poured out their fears, recounting Tiara's eerie behavior. The spiritual man listened intently, then delivered a chilling revelation. "Tiara is not just your daughter," he said, his voice grave. "She is the daughter of the marine kingdom. The time has come for them to claim her." "What are you saying?" Mrs. Caleb cried, trembling. "You never told us this before. Why would they want her?" The spiritual man sighed. "She was a gift from the marine kingdom. They granted you a child, but she was never fully yours. Now they want her back." Mr. Caleb, stunned into silence, eventually found his voice. "Is there no way to stop this?" The spiritual man hesitated before replying. "There might be a way. Bring her to the shrine. I will do what I can." On the way home, tension simmered between the couple. "This is your fault," Mr. Caleb snapped. "I didn't want to go to that man in the first place. We did this for both of us." Mrs. Caleb shot back, her voice breaking. "How dare you blame me now?" Unbeknownst to them, Tiara had overheard their conversation. She was waiting for them when they returned, seated in the parlor, her piercing gaze fixed on the door. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice cold and steady. They stammered, "We went to see a friend." Tiara smirked, her expression dark. "Don't lie to me. You went to the spiritual man, didn't you? You think I don't know? You don't love me anymore, do you?" Her anger began to boil over, and her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. The air in the room grew heavy as she unleashed her fury. Unable to contain her powers, she struck down her parents in a fit of rage. With their lifeless bodies behind her, Tiara made her way to the riverbank. The waters churned violently as a terrifying mermaid with a grotesque face emerged. The creature smiled. "Welcome home, my daughter," she said. Without hesitation, Tiara stepped into the river, her figure disappearing beneath the surface as the waters stilled. The legacy of the Calebs ended that day, leaving behind only whispers of tragedy and the haunting memory of a girl who was never truly theirs. Tiara was the daughter of the queen in the marine kingdom, a realm hidden beneath the waves, teeming with magic and mystery. After months of preparation, the time had finally come to crown her as the crown princess. But before she could earn that title, a test awaited, one that would challenge her in ways she could never imagine. Summoned to the royal chamber, Tiara stood before her mother, the queen. Her presence was commanding, her voice steady as she spoke. Before you can become crown princess, you must complete a task. Go to the land above and bring me the souls of pastors. Tiara knelt, her gaze fixed on the floor. Your wish is my command, mother, she replied without hesitation. The queen, her face unreadable, lifted her golden rod. With a touch, she infused Tiara with the power needed for her mission, and in an instant, Tiara vanished, whisked away to the world above. When Tiara reappeared, she found herself in a distant, unfamiliar town, far from the world she had once glimpsed as a child. Her beauty was captivating, impossible to ignore. Dressed in a flowing purple gown that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight and sleek black shoes, she moved with an ethereal grace. Her long, intricately braided hair cascaded down her back, gleaming like strands of spun gold. While walking along the road, Tiara caught the attention of a man driving a sleek car. He slowed down beside her, leaning out of the window. "Hey, pretty girl," he said, flashing a charming smile. "Why are you walking in the sun? Someone like you shouldn't have to work so hard." Tiara glanced at him briefly before turning her gaze away, uninterested. She continued walking, ignoring his attempts to engage her. But the man was persistent, trailing her with compliments and coaxing words. Finally, with a slight smirk, she stopped and agreed to get into the car. They chatted as he drove, and Tiara listened with feigned interest. When they arrived at his house, the man led her inside. Wasting no time, Tiara revealed her true nature. She struck swiftly, killing him with precision. The house was now hers, conveniently empty, as he lived alone. That night, dressed in new clothes she found in the house, Tiara stepped back onto the streets. As she wandered, her eyes caught the glow of a church hosting an all-night vigil. She observed quietly from a distance, and walked inside. Heads turned as she entered. Her presence, quiet yet striking, drew murmurs. Tiara ignored them and took a seat in the front row, bowing her head as if in deep prayer. When it was time for prayers, she joined in, crying and appearing completely devoted. As the vigil ended and the congregation dispersed, Tiara stayed behind, sitting alone in the now empty church. The pastor, noticing her lingering, approached. "Excuse me, young lady," he said gently. "It's time to go home. We need to close the church." Tiara looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was chased out of my home. Please, I need help." Moved by her apparent distress, the pastor tried calling someone who might assist her, but the calls wouldn't go through. Tiara suggested, her voice soft and desperate, "Maybe I can stay at your house, just for tonight. I'll sleep anywhere, even on the floor." The pastor hesitated, conflicted. He worried about what others might think, but compassion won over caution. "All right," he said finally, "I'll help you." At his home, Tiara sat on the couch, sobbing as she spun tales of hardship and suffering. The pastor tried to comfort her, offering kind words and a supportive hug. But as he held her, she began to pull him closer, her touch becoming suggestive. She kissed his neck, her hands sliding over his body. Shocked, the pastor pushed her away. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice shaking. Tiara stood, her posture now confident and alluring. Crossing her legs, she smirked. "Don't you like what you see?" she teased. The pastor swallowed hard, visibly sweating. "This is not right," he stammered, but his resolve was crumbling under her seduction. Despite his inner turmoil, he gave in to her allure. The moment he succumbed, Tiara's true purpose was fulfilled. As he lay vulnerable, she began laughing, her voice echoing with malice. "Ha ha ha," she cackled. "Ha ha, ha ha ha." Her laughter grew louder, more sinister. The pastor's soul was now hers, claimed by the spell she had cast. Before his eyes, Tiara vanished into thin air, leaving nothing but her wicked laughter lingering in the air. The next morning, when the pastor woke up and got out of bed, a horrifying realization struck him. His manhood was gone. Panic surged through him as he stumbled back, his mind racing. He remembered the strange woman from the night before and how she had vanished into thin air. His hands trembled as he clutched his head. "What have I done?" he whispered. Shame weighed heavily on him. He couldn't bring himself to confide in anyone. How could he explain what had happened without exposing his own guilt? The pastor sat alone in silence, consumed by fear and regret, unsure of what to do next. Tiara sat in her dimly lit room, watching the TV as another pastor appeared on the screen, passionately preaching to his congregation. She smirked, her eyes narrowing. "Another one," she whispered to herself, a glint of mischief in her gaze. Leaning in, her voice dropped to a taunting whisper, "I'm coming for you." Her laughter, soft yet sinister, filled the silence as she leaned back, the room growing darker. The next target was already in her sights. Will Tiara's charm and cunning be enough to defeat her next target, or will she finally meet her match? What is she planning behind that sly smile? Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can be the first to see what happens next in part 2. Things are about to take a darker turn.